Group of Senate Democrats writing a letter to President Trump asking him to walk back his deal to sell chips to China, saying the following: the willingness displayed in this arrangement to negotiate away America's competitive edge that is key to our national security in exchange for what is, in effect, a commission on a sale of AI-enabling technology to our main global competitor is cause for serious alarm. Joining us right now to sound that alarm, Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who signed that letter. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Andrew. Great to be on with you, and I appreciate your highlighting this concern spread across a number of senior Democrats about the decision to allow Nvidia to export its nearly cutting-edge H20 chip, which is capable of doing a fair amount of advanced AI work to China.
Okay, so here's my question to you. Do you believe that somehow there was a shakedown from the White House and that because these chip makers are giving money to the government that we've effectively, or this administration has decided to put the national security issue aside? Or do you believe, as I think supporters of this administration would say, was that there was a conversation that was had about the idea of the trade-offs between, providing H20 chips to China and potentially, therefore, pushing out market participants like Huawei and others? This would be the argument in favor.
Yes.
And that is actually a reasonable choice.
Look, I've heard the argument that what we want to do is to have U.S.-made chips end up becoming the standard chip for AI, and thus making sure that NVIDIA's technology ends up being more broadly adopted.
That doesn't sound crazy, does it?
That does not sound crazy. But here's the core challenge. Recent advances in China through, for example, DeepSeek, genuinely surprised American technology leaders and national security leaders, and so too their advances in chip making. And I think we have a basic policy tension here between trying to work even more closely with our core allies in Europe and in Asia to constrain China's access to the most sophisticated and advanced chip design and chip manufacturing technologies, or to frankly compete and try and flood their market. I'm not sure that latter strategy is going to work or work well.
So, Senator, there's two issues here. And the question is, let's just try to separate them. There's one issue, which is the issue you raise in your letter about effectively taking compensation for these chips and what that's about. And we can have a conversation about industrial policy and the way the administration's approached that. And I think there's a separate issue, and they're often getting conflated now, about national security. Let's just go straight national security, and then we can get into the economics of the industrial policy element of it, which is to say, you believe that we should not be providing these chips at all under any circumstances.
Well, look, what I'm concerned about today is press accounts that NVIDIA is continuing to develop farther and farther cutting-edge chips for export to China. Obviously, this is a race for whose technology and whose standards are going to govern in the 21st century. And I want free markets and free societies and democracies to have the upper hand against an authoritarian regime like the PRC that is trying to embed their systems and their technology into everything.
Senator, we asked Treasury Secretary Bessent the other day when he was on about this, and he very forcefully said these aren't the most advanced chips anymore, the H20. And then what's the next one, Andrew? So what about the next one? Is that going to be part of what they're allowed to sell to China? He said, that's not me, that's commerce. And you'd have to ask Secretary Lutnick. But if it's not the most advanced chip, for giving them the crappy chips and getting 15%, does that change? Not crappy, but not the most advanced chips. Does that change your calculus?
It would be a factor, Joe. I do think that H20s are far from crappy. They were cutting edge just a year or two ago.
That's a lifetime.
Let's
that's
agree.
So 2024.
Joe, let's agree with the point that we shouldn't be giving China access to the most cutting edge technology. Okay. We continue to have world-leading technology in
Senator,
a few key areas, but the Chinese are racing to catch up with us.
But let's just get into the technology itself. So Huawei builds its own chips, and what they have done, to the degree you believe it, to get even halfway near what NVIDIA has done, is they have effectively daisy-chained a whole bunch of their chips together. That's what's really happening here, right? And then you have effectively Nvidia on the other end of things where you don't have to do that. But you're not getting the most advanced version of it. So at some point, you'd prefer to effectively push out the Huawei chips if you could, no?
I would prefer to make sure that we have the talent, the institutions, the capital, and the approach to markets that's going to win in this century. The Chinese have pulled off a remarkable feat of engineering, as you described it, to daisy chain lower sophistication chips into a competitor product. And their recent advances in open model AI have been genuinely impressive. One of my core concerns is that we need to be making sure that across talent, capital, and technology, we are closely aligned with our best partners. I just led a bipartisan delegation to Australia for a conversation not just about nuclear-powered submarines and our conventional defense, but about where are we going in AI, in quantum computing, in precision biology, and making sure that across countries like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, the United States isn't pursuing policies, whether it's in tariffs, immigration, tax, or other issues that divide us from our most promising partners, because it's going to take all of us, all of the advanced democracies, to compete and win in this very difficult area of artificial intelligence.
Senator, let's bring up the point of where Congress stands right now. It did seem for at least the last 8 years even, maybe, that both sides of the aisle were pretty unilaterally thinking that China was the enemy, that much more needed to be done, that they can't be trusted, that they are a threat to our national security. You all passed a bill on TikTok saying that TikTok could no longer be here. It still exists, as the president has extended that. And there are a lot of people who look at some of the moves from the administration, the current administration, and say, hey, they are much more focused on trying to get economic issues in place, like tariffs, like fair trade from their perspective, than they are on some of the security issues. And maybe those security issues are taking a back seat. Is that the case with Republicans in Congress, or is there still a united front in Congress saying, hey, we're far more concerned about the security issues?
Well, Becky, that's a great summary of some of the current tension between President Trump's efforts to get a deal with China and widespread concerns among senators I talked to that China remains our principal competitor and will be for this century. We've got real concerns.
Enemy? How do you see it? Because you can be an economic competitor, but do you see them as a defensive threat to this nation?
Yes, they are an adversary of the United States. The Chinese Communist Party, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, intends to be a hegemonic power, not just in their immediate region, but globally. And they are building the Navy, the Air Force, the missile capabilities, the nuclear capabilities to push us out of a leadership role globally. They are rewriting the standards for global commerce. They are using every tool of national power. One of the positive things I think about Australia, as an example, is that a decade or more ago, as a democracy that is a robust economy, that's a very advanced society, they were uncertain about whether their future lay with being more aligned with China or more aligned with the United States. The Chinese then really went after them, and with overt and covert efforts, tried to influence their politics, tried to economically coerce them through trade actions. And across the political spectrum, Australia's leadership has chosen to stand up to China and to align themselves with the United States.
Senator, I got to ask you just a different question real quick, which is this. On the Intel situation, you were a huge proponent of the CHIPS Act.
Yes.
And here we are, and President Trump is saying that he's going to effectively take equity from Intel and possibly others for the grants that have been provided. That was not the original deal, as you know. Do you believe that's the appropriate way to approach this? And what do you think about that policy?
Well, look, I don't think Intel is on the verge of bankruptcy. I think its market position has been softening. Part of the move towards the CHIPS Act was on a bipartisan basis to embrace what had long been discarded as industrial policy, to make loans and grants because of the critical role that semiconductor chip manufacturers and designers play in our national security and our economy. I'm not clear what's the upside, what's the benefit for taking an equity position in Intel against the risks. And I do think that the president should consult with Congress, and we should have an open conversation about what's our goal here. When we took positions in major financial institutions after the housing collapse and the Wall Street challenges of 08, 09, when we took positions in major auto manufacturers, there was lots of pushback from folks who said the government shouldn't be taking major positions in private sector companies, and we should do so only to stabilize them and exit as quickly as possible. So Senator, I think there are risks and rewards to possibly partnering through an equity position, and we should approach it cautiously.
I like their position is softening. I like that. That's like a stock chart. It's building a base. It looks like a coiled spring. Senator, before we let you go, I know that during the confirmation of Lisa Cook, you were quite effusive in your praise. You've known her for 3 decades. Just care to comment on this latest controversy?
Look, what makes me concerned about this ongoing effort to pressure the Federal Reserve is that President Trump has recently demonstrated that when he doesn't like the numbers, he will fire folks. His firing of the leader of the Bureau of Labor Statistics over softening economic numbers reminds me of someone who says, I don't like my weight, so I'm going to break the scale. And I'm concerned that what may be happening here is that Bill Pulte from FHFA is trying to work for President Trump in pushing out members of the Fed. Preserving Fed independence is important for our economic stability and security. Globally, we are the leading capital markets, and in countries where the monetary policy is controlled directly by the executive, by the elected official who runs the country, it's a negative. So
Senator,
I have confidence in Lisa Cook. I've known her for decades, and I'm concerned about the trajectory here of trying to put a thumb on the scale.
Senator, my question to you, though, is if, in fact, she did something illegal, A, should she continue to be in this role? And B, does it matter how this allegation came about? Meaning, the question, of course, did it come from a tip or a whistleblower from outside the agency? Did somebody inside the agency decide to start to look at her? Are they weaponizing, effectively, these agencies? Does that change the dynamic for her if, in fact, she did something wrong?
Of course, it is and should be a concern for all Americans if access to our data by the IRS or by a federal housing finance agency are being used explicitly to target people for political ends. One of the alarms I raised about Doge and Elon Musk having access to huge amounts of personally identifying information of Americans is that it might be misused for political purposes. And in previous cases where there were allegations that whether it was the IRS or something else was being used selectively. Can you answer
Andrew's question? Does it matter if it was gotten by these means? Can you hate the process, but still, does it matter if something illegal was done?
There should be accountability for illegal acts, but it does matter how that information is gotten. Both can be true.